Okay, cool. So I think we'll just get started. The numbers have kind of settled. So good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Stephen Thompson. I'm one of the community managers here at the Data Lab. And I'm delighted to have Michaela DeMello joining us this afternoon. Michaela is currently a data specialist at Leg Group, where she leads initiatives on data culture, ensuring ethical and data-driven decision-making across the organization. And she was previously the data and AI ethics lead at Rolls-Royce. So if you ask me, it's a pretty cool career history. So quite excited to hear what Michaela's got to say today. Today we'll be talking about data and AI ethics and compliance. For the past several years, ethics in data and AI have been a growing topic of debate as the public's understanding of these technologies has evolved. So the aim of the session today is to link current regulation discussions to data ethics concerns and highlight the relevance of data ethics and regulation to all of us, not just those that work in ethics or compliance. If you work with technology and you're interested in the current tech landscape, then you're in the right place. And this afternoon, Michaela will cover ethics versus compliance, AI regulation, accountability, and practical strategies that you can implement, whether you have ethics in your job title or not. So today's session will last up to 60 minutes, including time for questions at the end. Michaela's presentation should last around 20 to 25 minutes, and then there'll be plenty of time for you to ask your questions. So if you have any questions, please make sure to post them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure we get to those at the end. As always, the session today forms part of the Data Lab Community Events Programme. We are an online community for anybody who's interested in data and AI. We've got over 6,000 members from around the world. We run regular events and webinars. We post jobs in data and AI. We've got a free mentorship scheme, and it's just a general great place to be if you are interested in kind of getting involved in the data and AI community. If you're not already a member, most of you, I think, would like to think are members. In fact, if you are a member, post in the chat and let us know that you're here. But if you're not a member, it's completely free to join. You can sign up scanning the QR code, which should be in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen at the moment. And you can sign up for free and get involved in what we've got going on. So that's everything from me for the moment. I'm going to hand you over to Michaela now, who's going to talk about ethics and compliance. And then I will come back at the end to kind of moderate the questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Stephen. And yes, definitely double down on signing up to Data Lab. I've gotten into a lot of really interesting talks from the recordings and stuff from other sessions too, so I highly recommend taking a look if you are not a member already. But moving swiftly on, I'll just take a second to share my screen, bear with me, and do let me know when it comes up. Is that all good with everyone?
Yeah, that's coming up nicely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, so Stephen mentioned as well, if you have any questions, please do pop them into the chat and we'll look at them all at the end. So make sure you do write them down so you don't forget. Okay, so a glowing introduction. Thank you, Stephen. But I am aware that this can be quite a dry topic, so I'm going to try and keep it as understandable and easy to keep track of as possible. But generally what we're going to do today is go through ethics and compliance. I'm going to give a bit of context as to the kind of position I'm coming from. I think there's a lot of different discussions within this field. So I just want to highlight where I'm coming from this. And then most importantly, explain to you guys how you can take some practical tips into your organization, within your role as well, that may not necessarily be within ethics too, and kind of see where I can hopefully give some advice from my experience there at the end. So to start off, just want to explain what we're going to go through. So firstly, I'm going to start talking about explaining what ethics and compliance actually is. Where's the line between the two? It's really important that we clarify this because they are very easily confused within colloquial talk within the workplace as well. Then I'm going to talk about the risk of working within ethics and compliance and the things that are involved and how high level it can be, as well as help make it a little bit more tangible. A lot of these discussions are very conceptual. It's quite difficult to wrap your head around. So we'll look at a couple of case studies that are all public case studies that you guys can look up in a little bit more detail after, but just to help give you guys an idea of it. And then we will look at regional regulations. Again, very high level, won't go into too much depth. This is quite a short session we have today, but just so that you understand what kind of regulatory fields that companies are having to deal with today and understand some of the current discussions that are happening. I think we can all appreciate that AI moves at a very, very fast pace these days. So what are we actually talking about within ethics compliance when it comes to AI in the recent years? And then finally, as I mentioned, some practical strategies as to how you can contribute without the ethics job title as well. It's important that we all get involved in this conversation. So that's the outline of the call today. But we'll start off with what do I mean when we're talking about AI? Why is this important? Why are we talking about it? I feel like the phrase a double-edged sword is quite familiar to people that are interested in AI. We've used that phrase quite a lot before. There's been a really rapid integration of AI within our daily life, but also business lives as well. And that is within, because of our unprecedented opportunities that we're seeing today. So it's even within some of the tools that we already use. So even PowerPoint, right? Like there's integration of AI capabilities within that these days, which is how I actually generated the image at the top of the screen, just with the title there. So there's so many ways that we can increase efficiency with some of our tasks. So it makes sense that this has been integrated so quickly. But then with that obviously comes quite a lot of challenges. The main ones obviously we're going to talk about today are the ethical challenges. And there's quite a wide range of what that could encompass. So I think a really common one that comes up talking about ethics is bias, but there's also things like copyright concerns that have been coming up more recently in the news. So if any of you have been following it, there has been discussions around this in the US in lines with OpenAI wanting to use copyright data for training their ChatGPT models. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on every single day that's very difficult to keep up with. There's new dilemmas all the time. So something that I understand can be quite boring and quite dry at times, but frameworks are really important to help us standardize how we look at these ethical dilemmas and give us the language that we need to approach them. They're not perfect, but it really does help us in making sure that we are looking at all of our projects with a critical lens every time. So I've mentioned ethics, I've mentioned, I feel like compliance a little bit as well and alluded to it. So I just want to be really clear about what I mean when I'm talking about that. So I think the most familiar one out of the two would be compliance. I'm just going to confirm what I mean when I talk about that first. So compliance is usually referring to anything to do with adherence to laws and regulations that are enforced by governing bodies. There tends to be mandatory frameworks involved with these, and there are clear penalties for those and any violations that could come along with that. There is also a focus on meeting a minimal standard within these frameworks and laws. Whereas in comparison, ethics, which is a newer kind of, I guess, sister to compliance, it's more focused on moral principles that guide these behaviors beyond the legal obligations outlined by legal compliance. They are voluntary completely. They are shaped by societal values and expectations, which means that they are iterative and should be continuously thought about, discussed, reviewed, as well as these things change over time. And by doing this, you can ensure then a fairness and responsibility within AI development. It's not one and done, and then you just leave stuff unchecked. It should be reviewed and checked again. And as I've kind of alluded to here, and you can kind of see within the definitions, I guess, that I've tried to frame, they both work hand in hand to create responsible AI systems. You can be compliant and unethical and then not have a responsible AI system, if that makes sense. And you can try to be ethical, but then you will run into blockers or issues with advancing with projects if you're not being compliant with the laws as well. So it's really important that these go hand in hand. So now we're going to look at some of the risks, and I've already kind of said in the previous slide, there's some financial risks for sure as well, which would be immediately top of mind for companies. So that could be around penalties or fines, any legal costs, if you're found to not be compliant with some of the relevant legal laws surrounding the projects you're working on. There will be operational disruption that could lead to very long-term at times, depending on the size and scale of the projects, of audits. This would impact resources as well for the companies and how you function and continue to deliver on other projects as well. And then finally, one that's a little more conceptual and difficult to understand the extent of until it happens is reputational damage. So you can lose a lot of trust with your employees, but also with, depending on your type of business project, with your consumers as well. And this can lead to a decrease in market share and talent exodus as well, which can be extremely costly for a business. And that can persist over years. So it takes a long time to build up a business. If there is an issue with your compliance or your ethics, it could be gone quite quickly or drop, not necessarily gone, but drop quite quickly and take a very long time to rebuild. I think to conceptualize this, a really good example would be to think about the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica case of about 2016 when it came to the US elections. I won't go into detail on that, but because I'll be here all day talking about it. But just to give you an idea of the reputational damage that can have and how people's perceptions are very difficult to change about that past it. So I think Meta still has an issue to this day with trust in comparison to competitors. And that's just a personal view, but I think that helps make it a little bit more tangible about how far reaching these risks can be if they're not taken seriously or approached properly by companies. But I wanted to look at another case study in a little bit more depth, and I wanted to look at one that was a bit more UK specific. So I thought I would highlight the case study from 2020, where in the UK, a lot of school exams were cancelled because they were taken in person. So what they did is they actually used predicted grades from teachers for each of the students and algorithmically standardized these with exam results from previous school years for the same school in the same area. So quite quickly, though, a problem emerged where the tool tended to favor certain demographics. An example would be that they favored those from more affluent areas. And as you can see from the graph on the side, these are taken from some BBC articles about it. It tended to downgrade people about a third of the time, which was quite significant. And it obviously impacted a lot of students then being able to go to university and have that kind of social mobility, especially within a really difficult time of the pandemic and the lockdowns. It was quite rightly saw a lot of public backlash and discussions around it. There was a significant lack of confidence in the government and also a wider public mistrust for these emerging technologies and algorithms. When the pandemic was a time where we were encouraged to and supposed to be embracing the technology to help us continue with life as much as possible and connect with each other as much as possible. And I think that really highlighted the kind of issue of a digital divide within the country as well. So just to give you guys a bit of an understanding of that. So lessons learned, there are very in-depth lessons learned and documentation about this on the government website, which I do recommend looking into if you're interested in this in more depth. But for the sake of this presentation, I would just say that it kind of shows that ethics really needs to exceed basic compliance. Like as a project, it was compliant and they had access to all of this data and was given it voluntarily by the teachers, and I'll use the previous school results they had available to them. But it showed that ethics really wasn't considered very well in this, and that thorough testing is really essential to ensure that this kind of issue doesn't really crop up again, because that would have been picked up quite early. There was obviously an issue of time constraints with this project specifically, but yeah, it does go to show that then for other projects and hopefully within companies, we can learn that that is definitely necessary. So that's the case study. Now to look at evolving regulatory landscape. So there are, I feel like weekly these days, new standards coming out, but we're going to just talk about some of the main ones that could be applicable to different countries, companies that operate globally and in different countries, and how that could kind of impact them and how you would operate them within an ethics and compliance discussion. So firstly, let's talk about the EU. So the EU AI Act that has actually recently just been come into play, I think last month, has more of a risk-based approach, where we are prioritizing fundamental rights, accountability, and oversight. So it's quite high level and just looking at the risk side of things. Whereas in the US, quite opposite, where they're looking at more state level regulations with federal guidelines. So kind of makes sense in how the US operates anyways within their legal system. And their focus is quite predictably about private sector innovation. Kind of similarly, China is also state controlled, but obviously in contrast to the US, focusing more on censorship, national security, and then social stability as well, and how the AI and technologies are kind of supporting those initiatives. So there's quite a range of different approaches, as you can see from these. There are also much wider global guidelines as well. So for example, from the OECD, UNESCO, and the UN as well, these focus on cooperation across countries, companies, and the difference is that these are non-binding principles. These are not law in the same way that the EU AI Act is, for example, and they are more to influence and guide the creation of these initiatives. So yeah, I do recommend looking at the documentation for these in more depth if you are interested. They are quite long and dry though, so that's why I just kind of gave you a taste and an insight into the different approaches here. But I definitely did want to drill a little bit deeper down into what the UK is doing with the regulatory landscape, because it is actually quite different and they've taken a slightly different approach. We are actually looking at more sector-specific regulation. So we rely on existing legal frameworks instead of creating new AI-specific laws like the others have been doing. This is more of a business-friendly approach. It means that it's up to regulators of different industries and fields to, within their expertise, adapt to the changing environment. So it means that they're quicker to react, and also probably, in theory, more likely to see the opportunities available to them as well, which makes it really flexible for them to innovate. And I guess the idea is to promote innovation and competitiveness. There are some issues though with this. There could be potential gaps with this type of approach, where this non-binding guidance, again, similar to the global guidance, it risks there being blind spots in emerging areas. So where maybe the like sector-specific regulators are maybe not as close to the businesses or innovations that are happening, the government doesn't necessarily then have a say over that, because these are just guidelines similar to the global ones. Doesn't mean that is happening. It's just kind of the setup does suggest that could happen as a risk of happening. There were also a lot of commitment concerns when this came out. This was published on the government website, I think in 2023. And people were kind of talking and saying that it seemed like the UK were taking a less proactive stance by only giving guidelines, seemed to have a reduced priority for ethical governance. I would argue, though, that the UK have been involved in a lot of discussions around this topic, so this is not necessarily the case. This is just kind of the conversations that came out when this guidelines was published. And in that vein, recent developments in data and AI ethics. So great, we're talking about all the regulations that have come out over the past few years, but how has that shaped what's going on now, and how are we talking about AI ethics and compliance now? So as I mentioned, the UK have been involved in quite much wider conversations that have kind of abated that concern over commitment. And a really good example is the AI Safety Summit in 2023. And it kind of signaled, really strong international cooperation on AI risks, and put the UK in a strong stance to continue those, as we've seen in more recent discussions since. There was a controversy around this though, because even though we had launched our guidelines in the same year, we had also disbanded our AI ethics advisory board just before the summit. So people were kind of unsure how this summit was going to go, but it did come out with a very productive and productive discussions for us. I recommend reading some articles around it if you're interested. I mentioned earlier about copyright challenges. So this is a really topical discussion that's happening now about it. And I just have highlighted one of the many articles that are looking at it. The kind of argument that OpenAI is having is saying that if the US don't move quickly on this, then China are going to beat us to it, so to speak. Not sure whether that's really the right way to come about it, but that's a personal opinion. These are the type of discussions and debates that are happening within the AI ethic community at the moment. And then finally, the AI Action Summit. So this is a different to the AI Safety Summit, and this was hosted by France in Paris last month, early February. I want to say the 9th to the 11th or something like that. And a really key development that came out of that was that the UK and the US, even though they actively participated in the summit, they declined to sign the safety declaration, which was looking more around inclusivity of AI. And their kind of reasoning for this that wasn't explicitly said but implied was that they were prioritizing innovation and were criticizing the overregulation that they felt was coming through from the EU AI Act coming into play at the same time in last month. So yeah, there's quite a wide range of topics that are going on at the moment. But this is just a flavor of the past couple of years, where we're at and how these kind of discussions are evolving. And it seems like there is a keen shift from talking about bias and risk and more to actual implementation and how we are balancing regulation with innovation to ensure that industries are not losing their competitive edge. So moving on, how can you guys actually implement any of these kind of best practices for ethical AI within your sphere? So I think the first thing to kind of talk about is who's accountable. And I would say that it's a shared accountability. There are developers involved. The company is obviously requesting these projects or wanting to integrate these technologies. I've obviously mentioned regulators a lot within this call. So they obviously have a really big part to play to frame the environment in which we play with these technologies and innovate. But then also the end users that are using them are really, really important. And you all must contribute to ensuring that your experience of and usage of AI is ethical. But what does that mean? There are a few different topics that I recommend you can come from, and that's kind of an accessible topic that everybody can get involved in. One would be transparency. So systems should all be really clear and explainable through the documentation, and anyone from end users to developers that created it should be involved in that process. Even if it is a product that has been used in the company for years, if you don't understand some of the documentation or are not sure how to use it, maybe there's been a new integration added and it doesn't quite work for something, do speak up about that so that we can ensure that it's transparent, easy to use for all. It's supposed to be there to help with efficiencies, right? And be there for a reason to help, not to hinder or make your life any harder. So if it is, let your developers, or it depends how it's set up within your companies. I would definitely maybe look into how that works. Sometimes people within the ethics side of things or compliance side of things or developers, they are in different teams. Sometimes they're kind of all linked in together. So my suggestion would be to first go to your more familiar line of defense. So maybe your line manager, go to your compliance line as well. If you have a service portal for larger companies, use that too, just to ask the question. If they're not the right people, I'm sure that they would then be able to point you towards the right people, if that's the case. So after transparency, I'd also say about bias elimination. This is just to highlight that diversity is really, really key in these conversations. Everyone has a different perspective. And I think I mentioned earlier about ethics being in line with societal values, which change over time and they need to be reviewed often. A company is only as good as the diversity of its employees. So you're there for a reason and the company wants to hear from you. So if there is an issue with anything that you see or a perspective that may just not have been considered before, do bring it up. A lot of the times as well, there's been cases of unconscious bias coming through the data from developers and things like that, or the training data that's maybe not picked up straight away that you may see and somebody else hasn't. So yeah, definitely log it so that it can be looked at. And then finally, rigorous testing. So there should be more thorough testing of any kind of new AI product that is put into the market within your company, but also any more simple data projects as well. If you have the opportunity to, please do get involved in the testing. This is where a lot of this feedback can be given way more directly and be implemented, updated, iterated straight away. So if you have the opportunity to, do get involved in testing. That's something that everyone can do at any level, any technical ability at all. And if you aren't a part of those, maybe ask when reviews are going to happen so that you know when those kind of deadlines are going to come up as well. But I appreciate that a lot of that is quite difficult again to grasp. That's not that tangible and quite conceptual. So from my experience within Rolls-Royce, I wanted to highlight one of the key frameworks that we used. This is the Alicia framework, and it is a public document that you can Google right now if you wanted to, and you can download this image that's on the right here, which is the framework. And I think that it can really help with giving you the kind of documentation, clarity, but also most importantly, I found within talking about ethics is the language to approach these problems. It was originally made obviously with a quite heavy aerospace manufacturing perspective, but this is version 2.0, as you can see, that because we learned a lot from different sectors. So music, oncology, education, as you can see, this is just a screenshot from the website. And so we made it more simpler for a range of different sectors to benefit from it. That's not to say this is set in stone. You can take a copy of it and change some of the wording relevant to your team, your project, your industry, whichever. It's free and able for you to use. And there are within the website some videos that go into more detail about how you could apply it and how it's been helpful for some of these case studies that are written here. So oncology, for sure, it shows how it could apply to a healthcare project. So yeah, the key thing that I would say from my experience of working with this framework is the evidence part is really, really important. You can be as explicit or as non-explicit as you want, but you only get out of it what you put into it. So if you just reply yes, no, you're not going to get much out of this framework. Evidence here should be how have you, I can zoom in, great, wow, amazing. Evidence here would be, so for example, for bias, it can be, yeah, I won't read through it all, but if you just say, yes, we have looked at bias, that's not going to be helpful. But if you say, yes, we've looked at it because we've done this, that, and the other, so-and-so has documentation about this, like add the documentation to your document so that if there was an audit, for example, you've got a documentation full of all of the people involved, all of the people that have been kind of linked to it in any way, evidence that they have agreed to be involved in this or to take on the responsibility of something. So for example, if there was a loss of skills, who has said that they would be responsible for looking at what those loss of skills would be and helping people to upskill to fill that gap, and what is the project status on it. You should be able to kind of answer those from a framework like this or any framework that you end up developing. So yeah, that is a public one that you guys can look at today that I recommend. So conclusion, because I feel like I've given a lot of information to you guys. What have we spoken about today, and what's like kind of the path forward there? So firstly, hopefully, I hope I've kind of outlined how looking at compliance and ethics together in parallel gives your company and your projects as well competitive advantage, makes them a lot more robust, and shows where the benefit could be to your company. It should be building trust and enhancing brand reputation, as opposed to, you know, the other way that we hopefully will not be seeing anytime soon. Also, innovation balance, right? So that's the kind of discussion and where we're at with it now, where we're trying to regulate and make sure there's a standardization with frameworks and everything too that are adhered to by companies globally, but that we're not hampering innovation. We're still allowing people to find new ways to innovate and be more efficient in their day-to-day in a sustainable way as well. And then a collaborative approach is needed. So we're all needed, multiple stakeholders are needed to shape AI's future together. Whether you are creating it or using it, you're still a part of that end-to-end journey or usage of it. So your voice is important, your voice matters, and do speak up if there's anything that you are concerned about in any way, shape, or form. No matter the level of seriousness, it's still important. So the companies that get all of these right will be the ones that have the competitive advantage and will be thriving, has been my experience. And that concludes then my talk. And I'm happy to take any questions if you guys have them. I think I've seen it crop up a few times.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Michaela. That was super interesting. We've had some questions coming through there. Just if you do have any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A and we'll get them just now. Before we kind of get started with the audience questions, I was just wondering, I'd be quite keen to ask you about kind of how some of this stuff works in practice at Lego, if that's okay. So I know that kind of data and ethics are embedded within kind of Lego's culture, and you've got a data and ethics framework to kind of try and encourage healthy debate around kind of new data or AI implementations. But I would just be curious to know, I guess, how does that work in practice, and how do you kind of make sure that everybody feels that they can kind of contribute to the conversation?
Yeah, so we're the ethics team that we have in Lego is run by one of my colleagues. I'm like one of the advisors consultants within it. We're relatively new within Lego, so we're still building this up at the moment, but we are really focusing on creating a community of like data ethics pioneers or champions, however you would like to phrase it. In each company it's slightly different, so that we have kind of trusted advisors within each area of the business that can help with the right context of what's happening in the business areas to give an ethical perspective, and then lean on us as SMEs or subject matter experts to give more context or support there if needed. We're also use a slightly different framework to the one that's used at Rolls-Royce that I showed on the screen at the end of my presentation there, where we like to use impact mapping. So the one that we like to use is split into three, and we like to consider internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, and then the bigger picture or societal issues, depending on the type of project. And then we just get to see the ripple effect of, from this one piece of technology, who is impacted within each of those kind of areas, 3 different areas of internal, external, or big picture, and are there any ethical concerns or major impacts on them in that way, for us to explore further, have further conversations with those direct people. It could be a role title that you mentioned, or like specific named people, depending on how much you know about the project. And that's kind of the main way that we've been approaching a lot of kind of discussions, and really giving the agency over to the project managers on that. They know better than we do a lot of the time, of the intricacies, and can kind of help us give the context involved in it. So yeah.
Thank you very much. And then we've had Malcolm's asking, like, this has been in relation to the A-level grading case study that you mentioned. So when looking at things like A-level grading issues, pardon me, is it reasonable to assume that the methods were compliant with the guidelines and regulation, but they failed to come up to the ethical standards that the public would have expected?
Yeah, I would say so. Like I said, there was definitely a time constraint with putting that project together. It was like the first one of that scale as well. And I definitely would say that obviously there is more kind of flexibility and ability to iterate on smaller projects. So I don't condone obviously what happened, but I can see how that happened. I think it was rushed. And if the kind of the more ethics side of things was considered and that the need for testing was taken seriously instead of just being like, yeah, we've ticked all the boxes for compliance and that we have access to the data. It's been like voluntarily handed over to us. There's no other option for the students. So I don't feel like that was necessarily enough. They had to consent. Well, what other options did they have? I think that that kind of testing aspect should have been thought of in with higher importance. Yeah, I would agree.
Right, thank you. And then Tom is asking, in relation to the UK's approach to guidance on ethics, is the UK approach to guidance open to risks of bias or conflicts of interest if the guidance is industry or sector specific and is also led by those in the industry? In your opinion, is there any kind of potential for kind of bias or conflict of interest?
Yeah, I don't think any approach is free from bias at all. That's still like an underlying issue with it. I would also say though that bias isn't always a problem. There are needs for bias at times. Like if you're looking at a project that's to do with children, you're only going to be looking at children's data, for example, like looking at similar projects to gain some insights from. That's not a bias towards children, and you're not looking at other. It's because that's what the project is for. So yeah, every kind of project is going to be kind of needing that. But I do agree that there are some gaps then if it is industry specific, that there could be conflicts of interest and things there. That is, I would say, under more of the legal side of compliance versus ethics, and something that the regulators should already be, I guess, looking into with the government at the same time, rather than from an ethics perspective. And there's always a risk of that, and that's, I guess, the risk that the UK has decided to take in the name of giving the flexibility and innovation. I'm not sure whether they're looking at having a better oversight and understanding of that, considering they disbanded the kind of overarching AI board before in 2023, which I would have seen as quite pivotal to having that oversight for all the different regulators. There are a lot though, so that is kind of a mammoth task. But yeah, there is a gap there for sure.
Right, thank you. Jake's asking, are there any limitations to the Rolls-Royce framework that you shared? For example, what's missing from it, or could it be improved for the future? And are there other any frameworks that you have used? I guess you mentioned the one that you use at Lego as well.
Yeah. I feel like I'm a bit biased to having worked with it and like helped develop the Rolls-Royce one. Yeah, I mean, I think the fabulous thing about the Rolls-Royce one is that it's adaptable. It's not set in stone, like I said. So we've been really conscious of wanting to make it very generalized within the language there. So I guess that's probably potentially like a challenge with using it, in that if you don't adapt the language, it could end up being too high level, I guess, and maybe miss some of the specific contextual problems you have within your project. So for example, I zoomed in a little bit there and I looked at the issue of skill loss and how that could impact jobs, but maybe that's a really like big impact within the project that you're working within, where potentially you're putting a whole department of people out of job with the development of this AI, whichever type of AI it is. Then you probably would want that to not just be one line within it, and you would want to drill down into that. But I would say that it's a really good starting place to take from it. And like I said, it really helps with giving the language that you may not have to approach it and not really know where to start, which I think is very common within this field. Like even just trying to summarize the difference between compliance and ethics, it's a really big field, and it's quite difficult even for myself working within it to put the right words to it. That's where I see the strengths of it. So There are some cons and gaps and challenges with it, but I think it's a good start.
Yeah, I guess like with any framework, it's kind of it gets the conversation started, but you might need to tailor it to
Definitely.
your own needs and kind of adapt it as you go along.
Yeah.
So Lazarus is asking, do you have any thoughts on the tension between an ethical approach to AI tools, which take time and labor to produce, and then on the other side, the urge of the tech sector to move fast and break things? And how does that relate to kind of what you'd mentioned earlier around kind of competitive edge and those being the ones who take ethics seriously?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, this is a constant battle with the type of role that I'm in and with ethics as a whole. But you just kind of have to shout louder. I wish that there was a more appropriate way to do it. But at the moment, if it is kind of, especially within tech boardrooms and stuff like that, it's sometimes the one that has the best prepared and the loudest kind of response and pushback. Come with as much evidence and backing as you need. Ethics is beyond legal, but there are other things that come into it as well. So a really big area that I'm also personally very involved in would be diversity and inclusion. So you want projects to be inclusive. So that also links into the idea of if somebody's losing their job or their the scope of their job is closing, you still want them to feel wanted, needed, have purpose within the company, and find where maybe them other skills could come into the workplace, things like that. That's also within like diversity and inclusion mindset too. So make sure that you're rallying with people and you don't feel like a lone wolf, because there are so many benefits to doing that. And I've found that once you do make those benefits really clear, also sometimes the scary sides of like, if this is public, then you'll lose a lot of trust with your consumers. That really helps to get people to pay attention to you and to slow down when they see that there are risks that will take a very long, costly time as well to come back from. Is what I found has helped. It's a difficult position to be in, but yeah, I really, really recommend doing that.
Yeah, I guess finding the thing that they care about and kind of framing it around that to show
Exactly.
that ethics is important there as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got one last question, which is from Deborah Bratta, asking how important are data collection, sampling, and statistical modeling in reducing bias before the model building, and how do they influence the potential issues later on?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a very technical question that would probably be best to talk to my like technical leads and the technical leads of the projects that we'd be working on. From like my perspective, I would be coming in and questioning exactly that, and we'd be pushing back in on like what testing has happened before it's being like actually gone to production or anything like that. Like I would be wanting to understand how they've looked at gathering their data, what kind of checks and balances they put in place there, how they've ensured there is like limited bias. There's no way to fully eliminate it. Bias sometimes is completely unconscious as well and seeps into the product. I think we're seeing that a lot more with things like generative AI as well, where it's amplifying a single thought over and over that then can become quite extreme and not necessarily be the intention. So yeah, a lot of that does come into it, and that goes. I've tried to be really clear when I've mentioned AI, but we're also talking just about the baseline of data. So those core data management and data project principles are so key for then the end product of the outcome of an AI to be as useful and helpful as possible. If you don't get those core things right and collect your data ethically, then you're never going to have a very good product. And sometimes that's where a lot of people miss the first hurdle of rushing too fast, is by not checking their data sets properly. Dirty data, or data quality is probably a better way to say it, is so key to ensuring that ethical cycle starts off well.
So I think yeah, it's something that comes up all the time in conversations within in kind of that we have in the community around you can't really move on to AI until you've got your data sorted properly. You need to be kind of start at the bottom and work your way up, and don't kind of rush the process.
I
Cool.
would
Well,
say data ethics versus AI ethics is the way to start. Don't jump to AI, just think about the data first.
nice one. Okay, well, thanks very much, Michaela. It's been a really, really interesting session. We had loads of questions and kind of lots of positive comments in the chat from people who have enjoyed your presentation. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you all for joining, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, ask any further questions that come up if they do. And
brilliant. So we will we're recording the session today. So once the recording is ready, we'll pop it up on the YouTube, the Data Labs YouTube, and I'll send a link around to everybody who's registered, and we'll post it in the community and things. So you can watch back if you are looking to kind of go into anything again. What's coming up next in the community? Next month, we're focusing on life sciences and kind of applications of data and AI in life sciences. So if you're interested in that, check out the community and have a look and see all the events that we've got coming up. We've also got Data Fest coming up in May at the Assembly Rooms in Edinburgh, which is shaping up to be a really exciting conference. So if you're interested in coming along to that, please do have a look and kind of sign up. And otherwise, that's everything from us. So we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
thank you guys. Bye.
Cheers.